Are you now feeling the pressure? Because I think there's a petition that's currently
Your approval
online
ratings have dropped.
1.9 people who want the election to go again.
It's now over 2 million now? It's now just over 2 million.
Do you feel the pressure?
Look, I remind myself that very many people didn't vote Labour at the last election. I'm not surprised that many of them want a rerun. That isn't how our system works.
For once, Keir Starmer's telling the truth. That isn't how our system works. But will this petition actually change anything? Well, in one sense, I think it will. In another sense, I think it completely won't. But more importantly, do we actually want it to? But what good could the petition potentially bring? Well, for starters, there's no doubt that Keir Starmer's been on a globalist purge since he got into power. Southport is the obvious example. He seemed far more bothered by the aftermath of the murders rather than the murders themselves and what they say about modern Britain. That's alienated half the country already. Many people are concerned for the safety of their children, multiculturalism, mass immigration, and who's actually here. Starmer seems to think such people are radical extremists who belong in jail. Further to that, people are concerned about the police who act as a sort of woke paramilitary that might knock your door down at 3 a.m. And again, people have been jailed for tweets while actual criminals have been released early. And this is before we even mention the issues with the farmers, the winter fuel payments for old people, but perhaps most importantly, he doesn't seem to have an affinity with Britain or the British people, philosophically, politically or personally. Now let's be honest, they're not going to call a general election on the back of this petition. I doubt Parliament will even debate it. Parliament is dominated by the Labour Party, of course. But it may well put some pressure on Starmer and make him think twice about many of his policies, especially those which seem quite tyrannical to people who have concerns about modern Britain. But will this actually change anything? Well, I think it might slow the decline and give us more breathing space, but I don't think it will arrest the decline, let alone reverse it. I mean, even if you did get Starmer out, in the short term, Angela Rayner would take control, and God knows what that would be like. And even if we did hold a general election, the right vote will be split by Reform and the Tories, and that might mean that you'd have a Lib-Lab Green coalition in power anyway. But let's say the Tories or a Tory Reform coalition got in. Well, we already know that the Tories are Liberals in drag. Farage has made many sounds to imply that he's on board with the Liberal programme too, so essentially we wouldn't see that much change. But hypothetically, let's say I'm wrong and Farage got into power somehow, and then he came out and said, you know what, all that Liberal stuff I was saying was just to get the Guardian and the BBC on board. Now I'm going to try and enact a patriotic, pro-Britain, pro-Western government. The reality is he'd have obstacles and blocks at every turn. The British civil service these days is our version of the American deep state. Our judicial system is liberal-leaning. Media, academia, the political system is all globalist liberal-leaning. And corporate power is obviously globalist liberal-leaning. This all tells us that what we're facing in modern Britain is bigger than elections. It's bigger than Keir Starmer. Now, I don't like Keir Starmer. I don't think he's doing a good job at all. But as I've said before, we have to remember he's not there as a leader. He's there as a caretaker to carry out the will of the globalist elite. Now, don't get me wrong when I say this. I'm not trying to belittle the sufferings of old people missing their winter fuel payments, the farmers, and people that are frightened about what's going on in modern Britain, and if they say the wrong thing online, they're going to get thrown in jail. So yes, there are horrible things happening, but it may actually be a benefit in the long run. Why? Because more and more people are waking up and realising that Starmer is a massive problem. But what's behind him is an even bigger problem. After all, if we get rid of Starmer, who comes in and what can they even do to affect change anyway? So it seems that Starmer is actively accelerating that awakening that's going on in the UK and the Western world with regard to the state of our political systems. We don't have a say if we want mass immigration or not. We don't have a say if we want liberal values governing our society or not. Now, this is why I talk a lot about death and civilizational rebirth on this channel. I know it sounds very grand, but what else is going to affect major change in the Western world? We need to reawaken to our roots, in my view, rediscover who we are. If we don't do that, we'll have nothing solid to grow upon into the future. It's a cliche, but it tends to be true that the darkest hour really is before the dawn. I believe it may have to get a bit darker yet, but everything we're seeing at the moment are the early signs that people are waking up, not just to Starmer being out of his depth, but our whole system being pitted against us. These are just my thoughts. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.